Welcome to the Islamic Library Association. We are dedicated to showcasing Muslims' rich contributions to literature and society while advocating for accurate representation and equity in libraries. Hello and assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Kalisa Harris. I am a librarian and the founder of the Islamic Library Association, which advocates for the equitable representation of Islamic faith-based literature. We also highlight the contributions that Muslims make within the literary landscape. We want to thank you for tuning in to our conversation, and today we are here with author Rukayat Yakub. Yakub is the author of the 2023 Black Belonging Study and serves as an instructor at Rabat Academic Institute. She has a master's degree in Islamic education and is working on a doctorate in ministry to further her studies in belonging and community development. She is an award winning children's author, educator, publisher, trainer, and consultant on anti-Blackness with a faith perspective. She works with leaders to develop and implement best practices that infuse courage, kindness, and humility in community institutions. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rukaya. How are you doing?
Allah, it's so wonderful to be here. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for
Why,
having me.
no problem at all. Well, you have many, many hats. You do many, many things. So let's just jump right into this. I'd first like to talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion is, that term, that phrase is often thrown around a lot. Some people believe in it, some people do not. Some people flip flop depending on political policies and agendas at that current time. What is your perspective regarding diversity, equity, inclusion um, in your line of work?
So, in my line of work, one of the things I do because I primarily work with Muslim institutions is that I draw on shared values, and those shared values are just really ethical living. And if we have a community that exists of so many different people, it makes sense that the work that we do reflects the the variety, the variation that we find in our community. So I don't necessarily use those labels, even though I understand the importance of it, because sometimes we do have to call things and remind people of what needs to be done in communities. But for me, it's really about what is the example that has been set within our faith tradition? How do we live that example? And if we have challenges within it, how do we rectify our behavior so that our actions and our projects actually reflect the teachings of our faith, which is a very egalitarian tradition. We really believe that all humanity, that we are brothers and sisters. That's humanity, regardless of faith. Actually, this is what part of our teaching. So when we're engaged in projects, the fact we bring different people together is just a no-brainer, really, if you're thinking about how things should be done, even though in reality it's not always where it should be.
Okay, very great point. Very great point. So I would like to congratulate you on your on you pursuing your doctorate. Does these type of DEI and ethical frameworks, does this have anything to do with your doctorate degree?
Actually, my doctorate degree is about joy in education. That's what I'm studying, and I'm looking at in our community. What do we need to create spaces of joyful learning? And part of it is when I did my master's, I was looking at belonging in our schools, primarily actually in Islamic schools around America, and the results were quite disheartening, to be honest. The idea that there are many students who, just because of the skin color they've been given, gifted by their Lord, if you think about it, because everyone, whatever, however we present is a gift from God. And the fact that children can feel like they don't belong in a space solely for that reason, it was a really difficult research to be engaged in, interviewing people, reading their survey results, engaging in focus groups. I mean, there was so much resilience and strength and perspective, but it also was actually very challenging. So I decided I wanted to do something totally different. I wanted to focus on joy. And what does that look like? What have we built as a community in the past? What do we want to build? What do our young people want to see? What does that look like? What are the lessons we can benefit from? What are the mistakes that have been made that we can try to correct? How do parents, what tools do parents really need in, educating their children and transmitting the faith to their children? So yes, I guess it is a response to it, but I'm looking at it from a different perspective, as like, what do we build, as opposed to how do we fix some of the challenges in our community, even though I care deeply about both.
Yes. So, are you doing a qualitative study?
It's actually mixed methods.
Mixed
So
method.
I'm
Okay,
actually
I
going
can
to be
see
doing
that.
a general survey to get a big picture of what it is that, and in particular, I'm actually looking at Black Muslim parents, because when I did my study, the one of the points that came up was that when it came to Islamic schools, even though, and as a long term teacher and I've worked in Islamic schools, I know that these are spaces that have a deep love of our faith, deep love of children, and they really want to get things right. But there is a disconnect in so many of our spaces where students, and the data actually shows it's not just Black students, but it's more prevalent among Black students, where there is this sense of, not really feeling that you're part of the community, not
Mhm,
really feeling that people respect and value your own culture as the black, different Black Muslim cultures and traditions and histories. And sometimes people are not even seeing it. Like one of the participants in my study, she was just 18, and I asked her, did you feel that your culture as a Black Muslim culture was respected? And this was her response: they didn't know there was a culture to even respect.
mm,
So if someone that young can recognize that,
mm,
and I've spoken to like really well-meaning like Muslim educators, and I know that that's a challenge because many people have this idea that America does not have a culture, that
mm,
there is no American culture. And the thing is that there is no one American culture. That's true. You have all of these different cultures that come together, and there's no one Black Muslim culture either. You've got different strands, and the history is a rich, diverse history, but the reality is it exists. And if we don't know what it is, we have to take the time to find out, to read, to study, to ask questions, to be curious about this. Just like we understand, oh, there's a Muslim tradition in Turkey and a history there, or a Muslim tradition in Bosnia or in Senegal. We have to recognize that there's a history of Islam in this land, and it runs deep and it's powerful, and it's a story that we really have to know because we're part of it. Even if we aren't, like biologically linked to that story, but in terms of our faith, this is part of our tradition as any Muslim in this country. The story of Black Islam in America is very much our story that we get to benefit from, and we need to be able to really appreciate it and have gratitude for this story.
nice, nice. I love it. You made some excellent points. Would any of that have to do with the work that you do at Heart Work?
Yes. So heart work, as the name suggests, is about what kind of work does our heart need to engage in to
Mhm,
deal with some of the challenges in our society. And to be honest, this is a framework that can apply to any ill, any societal ill. I focus specifically on anti-blackness because it's such a deep challenge in our community, and I'll explain why. Because someone will be wondering, well, that's kind of harsh statement, but I'll
I
give
guess
some
so.
context for it. So, anti-blackness, and the definition I love to use is one by Dr. Kihana Ross out of Northwestern, and one of the main points she makes in her definition is the inability to see and value Black humanity.
Mm,
And I don't feel that most people walking around are deeply committed to that,
mm,
like consciously.
yes.
But at a subconscious level, many of us in this society have made a commitment to this, even without understanding or knowing. And part of it is just the very history upon which this country was founded. The excuse that was given in order to enslave a group of people, to break up families, to act with such violence against different cultures and traditions, stripping them away from what we refer to as the maqasid of the Sharia, the things that the Sharia came to protect, i.e., life, property, lineage, all of these other things that we're supposed to honor in a human being. All of these things were either stripped away or there was an attempt to take those things away. And people, these human beings from different parts of the continent were brought into this land under horrific conditions. And you know the history of this. But the excuse that was used was like, well, these people aren't really human. And when you convince yourself, when you've dehumanized a group, you've convinced yourself they're not really human, then you can do all kinds of horrific things that you would not normally do under normal circumstances. So when we think about that, that being the foundation of this land, and it's something that has never really been addressed head on. If you think about some of the other things that have happened, some of the other horrific things that happened in history, there's been a reckoning. Think about Nazi Germany. They went through a process of understanding what we did was wrong. And there was a process of what we would call, toba, some kind of repentance, where you're facing the harm you've caused, and you're acknowledging and you're turning away from it. And this happened in South Africa. And it doesn't mean these spaces are perfect, but at least when you go through a process, you've accepted your accountability. Whereas for this land, there's never really been that process. Laws were changed and the things happened in order to make life less violent, less damaging. But there wasn't a process of actually acknowledging that this is what we did. This was the wrong that was caused. This is the harm, and this is the exploitation that we engaged in order to create the wealth that we see in this nation. So I feel like we need to understand it. Any group that comes into this country, whether it's a Muslim or anyone from any part of the world, you come into an existing dynamic, and most of the time people don't really consciously not aware of it, but they're making a choice. Do I stand for, I guess, what you call empire, or do I stand against oppression and exploitation? And I know this is probably something very political, but the reality
Oh,
is
it's
it
the
affects
reality.
our day-to-day lives. Because if you don't understand the foundation upon which this land was built, and you don't understand the choices that you're making by aligning yourself, with one group or against another group, you're feeding into these myths, to these narratives that really shape our society. And sadly, as well, some Muslim cultures do have anti-Blackness within them. There are some interpretations of our faith. Obviously, our faith does not teach this and has never in any part of our history, but there are interpretations that, people have given, scholars have given, that co-sign some of these ways of thinking. And I think as Muslims, we have to be able to be really honest about our history, about our challenges, and especially when we recognize the kind of world we live in today, we have to stand up for what the Prophet ﷺ, established for us, what he taught us. If you think about the farewell pilgrimage and
Mhm.
the farewell sermon and that parting message he gave us, mashallah, we know that Allah Ta'ala, gifted him with what he said. His words weren't just said from his own caprice. It wasn't just, his own thoughts about it, but this was part of the gift of revelation. I mean, it's different obviously from the Quran, because this is, specifically, the divine revelation, but the words that he said were a reflection of what we needed as a community. And one of the things he talked about is that superiority that some groups feel over the other. And the idea that we have to fix it is not so much about, blaming and whatnot, but it's like, how do we take this knowledge that we now have been given, i.e., this is the challenge for humanity, and make it something that we can then build on so we can become the best versions of ourselves so that our communities can thrive. Because the reality is, with this existing problem of anti-Blackness, it's very hard for our communities to thrive. And people might be thinking, well, just talking about the Black community. I'm talking about the whole community. Because when you engage in a spiritual harm or something that is just wrong for your own heart, how does one thrive in that kind of space? And those people who are experiencing it as well. It's like there's so much that needs to be addressed. And for us to just recognize that this is a challenge. And
Mhm.
instead of being scared of it, being able to embrace it and say, we can move forward from this. But you can't move forward if you can't even acknowledge what the actual problem is. And there's so many examples, in our history of this happening and in the story of this faith. And that's one of the reasons why I just feel like it's something that even though many don't speak about it, is an underlying problem that impacts so much of our community.
Yes. Wow, that's very, very insightful, and I think it should be discussed as we're here today doing just that, and I really appreciate that. So, in regards to school, that's where children are, even adults for that matter. What do you think um, the role of school librarians and instructors can play in promoting positive representation and inclusion of not only Muslims, but Black Muslims and how they can better support those needs.
So, and you're thinking about like you say school librarians, you mean schools just generally around the country, as well as
Yes,
Islamic schools? Okay.
yes,
So I
I
would
think
say
they're very. I think they have their own separate issues, but like you're saying, it's not only non-Islamic schools that have anti-Blackness concerns.
yes.
So I feel that whether you're an instructor or of a typical regular school, quote unquote, or an Islamic school or a librarian in either setting, I think both play such an integral part of children's upbringing.
Yeah.
Um, but not only for children, even as adults,
Yes.
those types of roles are very embedded within communities and have huge impacts in people's lives, whether it's positive or negative. So, do you think that there's something that those type roles and positions within communities can um, do a better job at representing and supporting the needs of Black students?
Definitely, because I mean, you know how the power of story, narratives are so powerful. And I feel like, you know, the books that you read kind of gives you an idea about the world. And that's one of the reasons why it's so important to have different types of books, especially at a young age. I mean, all through one's
Mhm,
life. But one thing about young age is that the parents are reading these books to children, right? So as the children are learning, the parents are learning too. So when
mhm,
you present these stories, because one of the reasons why I wrote my first story was because, and it's about an African scholar, of Islam, is that whenever I would go to the library, I wouldn't really see books about Africans. Maybe I'd see a book about Nelson Mandela, maybe about the Mathai Wangari, the lady who was an environmentalist in Kenya who helped like revitalize the ecosystem there. I think those are the two books. Apart from that, it was books about birds and animals and fables, and these are all important. Fables are important. Stories about the environment are important. But when that becomes a single story, it presents this idea that there's actually no scholarship, there's no
yes.
innovation, there's no creativity, there's no thought. It's just nature and whatnot. And I feel like in order to really to understand and respect a people, you have to be able to see that the full range, right?
Mhm,
And that way you can see all of the possibilities. And this is for Black children themselves, but for other children too, because
yes.
that way you grow up and be able to actually see and respect people around you, because you've been presented with like these are people who are just as amazing and intelligent and brilliant, as complex as anyone else in history. But the challenge with when you don't have books that represent that, it reinforces whatever stereotype people may already have because of the deep-seated anti-blackness that exists in society. So I think educators is an amazing opportunity for them to be able to present a different kind of world to children. And for librarians, it's amazing. I mean, it's wonderful to have different books that represent Muslims, but to remember that a large portion of Muslims are Black Muslims. And if you were to look at the books around you, when you go to even take a Muslim publisher, if you look at the children's books, because I've actually done this where I've looked at children's books published by Muslim publishers. I don't remember the exact numbers because things have changed, but it was about 90% were Arab and Desi characters. And I would say maybe 10% or less were Black. And the
Yes.
reality is, I don't think it's like, this should be this competition because all our stories are beautiful. But because all our stories are beautiful, we have to take the time to recognize if 1% part of our community has very few stories, we have to wonder, why is it? Is it that we don't offer publishing contracts? Is it that we're not looking for those stories? Is it that we don't recognize these stories? And we only recognize the stories that look like what Islam is supposed to look like? Because if you think about it, Islam has been racialized in this country. It's been
Yes.
racialized as being Arab or Pakistani or Desi, because I mean,
Yes.
there's more to it
Mhm,
than that, obviously, but
of
you know
course.
what I mean. So when people, publishers are working with a manuscript, they might, and this actually happened to a friend of mine, African American woman, amazing writer, brilliant woman, and not knowing where to place her book
Mhm,
because it was about a African American protagonist, African American Muslim, and because in their mind, Muslim stories are about this particular person, and these are the people who are going to buy them. They weren't sure. But think about Chimamanda Adichie, the famous author of Americana.
mhm, Mm-hmm.
first started writing, she had that same challenge because they had this idea of the African immigrant story is a
Mm-hmm.
story of running away from the horrors of the continent and going into
Yeah.
whatever, right? And it's
Yeah.
just like that's not my story, middle class, grew up in a university town in Nigeria. That's not
Yeah.
my story. That doesn't mean that story doesn't exist, but it's not her
Yes.
story.
Mm-hmm.
And she tried to write the stories that they wanted from her, and she just couldn't do it. So she wrote a
Yeah.
story that was authentic to her. And think about it, since then, all of these amazing stories that have been coming out of different like African traditions that really, because before then, people understood, okay, if a Black American wrote a story, African American story, we know where to put it. If a, whatever person wrote a story, we know where to put it. But they didn't know where to put like the African narrative.
Mm-hmm.
But seeing her success and how people were able to connect with her stories that were deeply rooted in her tradition. But the thing about when you deeply root something in one thing is very specific, people can feel what the character is feeling. And that's the thing about the librarians. You might think, well, if I focus in and get books about Black Muslims, well, who's going to understand them? Any story that's well told, that tells a story of somebody, you can connect even if it isn't your tradition.
Yes.
That's the reality, and everyone in the library will benefit because they're amazing, reading amazing stories. So they're learning a bit about themselves, about the world,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a win-win for everybody. So I definitely encourage educators and librarians to really broaden their offerings.
For sure. So just like you were saying, meeting not just for yourself or someone who lives that life, but to help everyone. That's the same concept as the the mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors by Dr. Bishop
Definitely,
Sims. It's so important. But to touch back on something else that you said regarding um Black Muslims. So I think it was 2022, and I'm not sure, but I believe it was 2022. ISPU, what is it? The Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. I believe that's what it's for. I believe that they back in 2022, Black and African Americans were the largest racial group of Muslims within America, and it was like almost 30%.
yes, yes.
And in fact, the Arabs were, I want to say, I want to say it was like 12%.
I don't remember the numbers, but I do know that it was not what people expected, considering how the media presents the Muslim community.
Hmm. And then with Adichie, when she talked about, I think she heard the name of one of her speeches or something was like the dangers of a single story.
Yes,
And
yes.
we live that every day. We live it every day. So for her to write that was just, that speech was phenomenal. I mean, it's just great and it spoke on so many levels. And I think as a librarian personally, like everyone should hear it, especially librarians, listen to it, read it, even for instructors, because again, you're with those children or even adults, whatever it is, impacting people. And even
And
if you as
I
an
love that.
individual have a bias, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and no, I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt. The thing I love about her though is she's not just pointing about the stories people had about her, but even the stories she had about others. And I thought that was just so
Yes.
powerful that she had that like self-awareness to be
Hmm.
able to just express that, because many of us have our own little ideas about other people around us. I think his
Hmm.
name was EK or something like that, who was poor. In her mind, it was like that was the only story she had of him, not of anything else that really
Yes.
made up who he was. And
Yes.
the thing is that all of these things can coexist. You
Yes.
can have a difficult history,
Hmm.
but still have amazing lessons in there of resilience, for example. Or you can
Hmm.
have a life of ease, but still have moments of greatness or mistakes or whatever. I mean, that idea that the complexity of people and their stories is so powerful. Definitely.
So can you can you discuss the importance of creating brave spaces in schools and libraries where students can feel seen, valued, and supported?
You know what? I mean, it's true. We need to have those kind of spaces. But the thing is that we have to recognize that, for example, say you are your regular public school and you have a minority of children who might be coming in from maybe let's say Somalia or Iraq or Afghanistan, wherever it is. And when you bring in those children in, when you're seeking to make a space safe for them, you're teaching everyone in that space that we care about you. And that's something I want to really get across, because sometimes people think that when you're focusing in on a minority group, you're then excluding the majority group. The reality is, when you create kind spaces and brave spaces that are able to really talk about difficult issues in age appropriate ways, in ways that call in the community. Because the things that in a classroom, you're trying to build community. You're not trying to pit people against each other, because that doesn't benefit. What benefits is when you build community, because then you work collaboratively and everyone's learning, everyone is enjoying the process, and they feel like family. And that's what you want to build. And when you teach children how to be able to see and respect each other, it's a skill that then they can then apply in any space they're in. You
Mhm.
know, so it's really important for us to really build these kind of spaces. When I go about brave spaces, I think about spaces where we can have difficult conversations. We can talk about how somebody's being excluded, but in a way that doesn't, stigmatize those people who are excluding, or the
Mhm.
one being excluded.
Yes.
Because reality is no one benefits from that. And that child that does that, who knows the reason why? Talk about the single, the problem of a single story. The single story might be, well, that's the problem child. That's a child from a racist home, whatever. But the reality is there might be much more to it. It might be that, who knows? But it could be much more to that. And when you really speak to the needs of a child, their needs for competency, their need for relatedness, their need for accountability, that builds in that child the ability to do what's right, even when things are challenging around them. And that's why I think that when you're dealing with children who are misbehaving and disciplined, it's really important to do a lot of this calling in and giving them the skills where they can be the best version of themselves. Because as the saying goes, hurt people hurt. But when you start to heal, those people are not going to be hurting other people like that. And it creates a kind of space. So when we do these kind of work, sometimes people think, oh, well, what about the other children? If it's done properly with sincerity, and you're really building a space where people feel welcome, people are loved, people are respected, everyone in that space benefits from it.
Mhm. Wow. So, as a champion of diverse literature and spaces, what do you think libraries can do to improve representation of not only Muslims, but Black Muslim authors and having their books included within their collections?
So I think it would be good if, you know, this is the thing. There's so, because when I think about it, there are so many amazing self-published Black authors.
Yes.
And the reality is, your average librarian might not even ever know about those groups because they're not available in the regular channels that libraries use, you know? So I think if, as a separate librarian or even as a group, what will be really powerful is for them to figure out, okay, we want to actually do some kind of, survey or something to kind of get an idea of what actually is out there, because there are so many amazing books, so many amazing picture books, chapter books, novels written by like phenomenal like writers. And if we don't know what's out there, we don't know what to put in our libraries. We don't know where to get them from. Because some might say things, well, I don't know where they are. And that's because for many people, if we're not getting, if we don't have agents or we don't have, contracts with big companies, we're not getting that same kind of exposure. We don't have the same kind of marketing. We're not, in these kind of listings where your average librarian is looking for books. So I would say is to recognize, first of all, there is a deficit in this particular offering, and
Mhm.
that you as a librarian, somebody who has some authority in these kind of spaces, recognizes that it's important to address this. So first of all, we have to have an idea of what is out there and reaching out, because the reality is many Black Muslim leaders and organizations are familiar with what's out there. And once you start to talk to different leaders, like someone like yourself, and there are many other people, you can begin to survey and figure out, okay, what is out there. And then, bringing some of these books in. And it might be that not every book we might take into the library, but at least have an assessment. I could see this being done really at a national level, because it would really save, resources, and each librarian doing this separately. But if you could do that, you would have like hundreds, I probably actually more like thousands of books. And you can then pick and see what works. And then you can say, okay, some of these books are self-published. We can't have them in the library for whatever reason. Let's find a way in which we can make this happen.
Mhm.
Whether it's connecting some of these writers when you see the talent there to publishing efforts, or making an exception and saying, you know what, we're actually going to go for a few years where we go with non-traditional routes because we want to make sure that the children who come here get to read these phenomenal stories. I mean, whatever it is, the discussions need to happen. But first of all, we have to recognize there is a lack of these stories. And this is a problem for all of the people who visit the library, not just for the Black community or not just for Black Muslims. It's a problem for everyone because they get to miss out on all of these stories. And so recognizing there's a challenge and then coming together to just do the survey to figure out what is out there, assessing the books and seeing, okay, how do we bring these into our libraries? And sometimes you might say, okay, maybe the quality isn't the way we want it to be because somebody is self-publishing and self-publishing can be very expensive. So you might want to, do it so you can get your story out, but it might not be a quality that a library might become comfortable with. Then what I would see is you create grants or opportunities for those people to actually publish them in a high quality way. And that way you're uplifting writers, you're giving opportunities, and you're benefiting the community from those stories. So those would be some of the things I would say needs to be done, inshallah.
That's what the Islamic Library Association is about, to be able to establish uh, a place for Muslims or Islamic faith-based literature to be included in the options of representation. There's over 115 different committees under the American Library Association nationally, and there's no specific place that represents Muslims specifically. So that's what the Islamic Library Association is about, to create that space to have our needs and concerns discussed. And not only that, but to make sure that it's seen, because most libraries have a database of some sort that surveys what's in their collection. So it's, you have to notice and recognize that there's not enough Islamic representation, and not only Muslim representation, but Black Muslim representation. So, as we said not too long ago, that you know, Black and African American Muslims are the largest racial group of Muslims in America. So, to not have, because to only solidify, mostly like you said, Arab culture, and that's not the true representation. So, yes, those stories should be included, but shouldn't be only what people see and have access to. So, because you wear so many hats, which profession started first and impacted your writing the most?
I love that question. You know what's really funny is I want to say teaching because I love teaching. I've been teaching for like so many years, but I've always actually been writing. The challenge is I never believed that I could be a writer. So I've
Mm,
actually looked back and seen writings from like my early 20s. And actually one of the first books I wrote was when I was 19.
okay.
And it's so crazy because I've seen like some excerpts from that book actually in a very famous book, and I'm not going to mention the name of the book because I'm still wondering how that got there. Actually, I know how it got there, but that's another story. But mashallah. Anyway, but the point here is that I've been writing for such a long time, but I didn't realize that I didn't believe that I could write. That was one of the challenges I had. And that's one of the reasons now as a teacher, I'm always encouraging my students to write because I'm like, if you can come up with an idea, you can write. Because even if you don't have the technical skills, you hire an editor. That's what editors are for. Don't worry about that. It's about having those ideas and being able to have the stamina to just put it down. So I would say they kind of came together, but I've always been more comfortable in my role as teaching because I've always got that feedback that, okay, I can teach you, right? Whereas with writing, I never really shared my writing. I just used to write. I used to write all kinds of stories. And it was only when I actually did Montessori training, and because there's a lot of storytelling in the Montessori tradition, because so I trained as an elementary teacher. In the elementary years in Montessori, there's focus on stories because the idea here is that Maria Montessori talks about how the child goes from this absorbent mind where they just kind of soak everything up. When they get a bit older, 6 or 7, they begin to question. So it's called more like the rational mind now. It's like, well, do I really want to do that? Do I really, So there's like this more discernment. So what she says here is that you want to kind of grab their attention through stories. And that's kind of how you introduce a lot of lessons is that you start with a story. So because of that, I had to write stories and I had to submit them. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I can do this. And this is what made me more comfortable. And then went to a retreat. Actually, it was a retreat with Rapata. and we had a writing component, and I'd never seen that before. Maybe nowadays we have more of that, but back in then when you have Islamic retreats, it wasn't, you weren't talking about writing and self-development. It was more like, okay, sit down and listen to a lecture. But one of the teachers was, had us write for a few. She gave us a writing prompt and gave us some untimed and asked us to write. And afterwards, we shared what we written, and she gave us feedback. And her feedback was just so sincere, and it wasn't just, oh, that was nice, or you're a good writer, but she specifically gave me feedback about what I wrote and what touched her, what she found powerful. And I was like, I guess I can write. And that was really what gave me the push to just go ahead and start doing it. And also just the lack of the kind of books I wanted to see for my own children, but also for society. Because I love history. That's one of my backgrounds is I love history. I study a lot of West African history and Islamic history. And I feel there's just so many amazing stories that the world can benefit from. And there's so many stories of like Black Muslims that people are just unaware of. And I really wanted to be able to share some of these stories. So a lot of the stories I write are that, only because I feel that there's not enough of those stories. But the reality is, I just love stories generally. I love stories where we get to learn about people, their childhood, what they've contributed to society, what their legacy is. These are the stories I think are so powerful, and and that's one of the reasons why I write them. So.
Nice. So you have contributed to the stories that represents, you know, uh, oftentimes marginalized groups of people. How can we as a society continue to amplify those voices and stories of Black Muslim authors and educators to ensure that their work is celebrated and integrated into mainstream education and library settings?
Oh, I love that question. So one way is to ask for them. When you go to the library, ask for them.
Hmm.
When you go to a bookshop, ask for them. Because if lots of parents, especially parents from diverse backgrounds, are
Hmm.
asking, like, oh, I'm really interested in, Black Muslim stories. Do you have any? And imagine over a month you have 100 people ask one particular bookshop. They might say, you know what, maybe we should look and see what that even means. And they start to research it and they find out more about it. So that's the first thing I would say, is that the consumers of these books, i.e., parents, teachers, ask for these books, right?
Hmm.
Another one I would say is that we really have to have the funding to support Black Muslim writers. We need to have grants for this. Just like, in any place where we see a deficit, we put the resources in to be able to encourage it. We need to have that support. So when you have a talented writer, they're able to have the time to sit down and write the novel that they've been wanting to write.
Hmm.
They have, the support to get whatever resources they need. If they need to hire an editor, they're able to do that. So I'm thinking that, mentoring, financial support, buying the books, asking for them in those outlets that would then can bulk order them, doing the research, looking into the kind of recordings that you've done where you've been highlighting so many different Black, Muslim authors and the stories that they've written, and just becoming aware of what this world is, buying it as gifts for the people in your world. you know these are ways that we can, inshallah, support this work.
Yes. Um, as a librarian, I am telling you that it is essential for us to request what we want to have seen in the library. It is vital. Uh, Not only that, I do want to jump back very quickly to when you were talking about grants for self-publishing. So I agree 100% with that. And let's say even if that did not happen, let's just say it didn't. I still feel that librarians have a responsibility to make sure that everyone is seen and represented within the public library spaces. So if libraries truly were as equitable as they claim to be, then they would make sure that those books were there, even if it was a self published book. In my opinion, you can't just say, oh, we don't accept self published books. But on the flip side, you also do not provide what is required for a self-publisher to ensure that they meet requirements for the book to potentially even be in the library. To just say, oh, we don't accept self-published books, and you know that these types of books are not being picked up by the top 5 publishing companies. So you're ultimately excluding books while also publicly claiming to be equitable.
Yeah, I agree.
So,
I feel like that's why the kind of work you're doing is so important. The advocacy work you're doing is because you're pointing at, look, you care about this issue. It has to be more than just, you know, not, I wouldn't say lip service, but it has to be, we got to put that action there. And it
we
could be
see
that we make the
accountability.
exception. We make the exception. Okay, we normally don't, but we're going to do it in this case because we need to fix the deficit that we've created, and we
For
need
sure.
to support authors so that we do find them being published by, all kinds of publishers. And I remember there's one particular publishing house, and I don't know if I should mention the name. It's a Muslim publishing house,
You
and
don't have to say the
I
name.
think things have changed now, but I remember doing a presentation on this maybe 4 or 5 years ago,
Hmm.
and I think they had one book by a black Muslim author.
Uh,
And all the books they'd published. I think
uh,
they've improved now. I think they maybe have three now. But
but
it's like, and I think people don't even recognize it because the anti-blackness that exists is so subtle. It isn't like people have this deep-seated hatred. Because as you say anti-black, people are like, oh no, are you saying this about me, that about me? I'm not saying that. I'm talking about a structure that exists in society. And it's
mhm.
almost like it's in the air you breathe. And if you're
Yes,
not aware of it, it becomes part of who we are. You don't even see the absence. So
yes.
if we can't even see something, it's not like you're trying to avoid it. You just can't even see it. So my thing is that we have to talk about this. We have to recognize. You have to look and say, okay, if you go, if you're watching this, go to your own library at home and go take a look at the books you have, and
Mhm.
ask yourself, do I really have books that represent, what our community looks like? Do I have books that really is going to help my child have a better understanding of themselves if they're a black child, or other children if they're a non-black child?
Yes,
And if you don't, then you need to go get some books. Um,
yes,
yeah.
for sure. So, as a consultant, educator, and an author, how do you see those roles intersecting to create a full circle of literacy, education, and representation?
Ooh, I love this question. So and I wish I could write at the speed that the books are needed, and that's why for
Mm,
me, and alhamdulillah, a few years ago I did this. I want to do this again. We had raised some money and done a writing contest where the winning person was able to have mentorship with a really successful African American published writer. We were able to give like some nice financial prizes to the top three writers as well as illustrators, and alhamdulillah, we were able to do that. And it was just a few families that funded it, and we were able to do that. And there was also like some micro grants we gave to self-published authors to help them with either marketing or hiring editors. So, and I'm like very low scale. I'm a teacher. I don't have the big bucks behind me. So think about the resources that this community has. I mean, the Muslim community, mashallah, we do have resources as a community. The challenge is, do we put it into these issues? So my challenge to you, if you're watching this, or if somebody has sent you this video, is what do you personally want to do about this? How do you want to support it? How do you want to financially support this kind of work? Because it needs financial support, because reality is you can have skill, but if you don't have the time to write, then you can't write that book.
yeah.
You can have skill, but if you don't have the money to hire an illustrator, and hire an illustrator is not, it costs money to
Mhm.
get a typesetter or a book designer to do the printing. I know because I do this myself, but it's challenging. So, there's a lot that can be done. So you might not, write the stories, but you can support the work. You can buy the books. Like I've had friends who tell me, what, I bought a bunch of books and I gave it to all my family friends for Eid, or something like that. Just things like that, especially if it's something that you like. If you
Mhm.
read the book and you like the story, instead of just thinking, oh, mashallah, what a amazing story. Yeah, think that, make dua for the author, but then buy a bunch and give them as gifts. And that way you're putting the word out and people become aware. Because for many people, it's not a conscious thing that I don't want black books in my house. They're just not aware of all the books are out there, or even some of them. Many people aren't aware because if your main source is like some of the Muslim blogs out there, you don't see a lot of black authors on them. If your main source is Barnes and Nobles, for example, you don't. I don't think I've ever seen it. Actually, no, I have seen a couple. I have seen a couple there, mashallah. But generally, you don't have them. 2 or 3 books doesn't represent the vast, publishing, repertoire that the Black Muslim community has produced over decades. It's
Yeah.
been a long time that this has been happening. And, many of our elders, they were writing stories. hand drawing it, making these books
Yes.
for their children in their communities so that the children will be able to see themselves. I remember talking to a friend, from London, and she was saying when she was growing up in the 80s, the aunties in her community, they would write plays for them, they would write stories for them because they wanted the children to see themselves. So they grew up in a very vibrant black Muslim community in the UK, and being black and Muslim was just so normal because in their community they really provided like this representation that where they saw themselves. But so many children don't get to experience that. So
Yes.
we really need to think about how we're going to support this effort. And it
Mhm.
needs to be everyone supporting. Either you're writing, or you will put your money behind it, or you're buying the books, or you're sharing the word, or you're going to the librarians and saying, I would like to see this book. I want to see this book on the shelves.
Mhm.
And that's really the advice I would give for all your listeners, inshallah.
Yes. That's you brought up a very good point about you said you saw, two or three books, and that's normally what it is. And to me, I refer to that as the exception and not the rule. Because you'll bring a point up and they'll say, "Oh yeah, we have this one." You're like, that's the problem right there. You're saying this one, oh yeah, we do have this, and that. And when you can name the two or three, again, that's a problem, because you're trying to allow one, two, three, five, even 10 books to represent things that cannot be represented properly or adequately in such a small number. It's literally equivalent to like numbers matter. It does. Because we can have a book that properly represents someone, but if it's only one of that book, then that's not adequate. It may
Yeah,
be accurate, but it's
agree.
not adequate, and both
Yeah.
matters.
Hmm.
So, if you could have one request, and I know you gave a very good request, which was, to ask for to ask librarians to provide these books that you would like to see. But is there something else that um, educators, librarians, and community leaders um, could help? How they could help decrease racism and marginalization and increase representation?
I think they have to have an awareness of what's going on. Like I was speaking to an organization, I was doing some consultancy work for them, and they were talking about how they have very few Black Muslim participants in what they're doing. And I started asking some questions and talking to them, and then they began to understand that one of the reasons why they have so few is because they're treating like the whole Muslim community as a monolith. So when they're doing things, they're not taking into account the different lived experiences of the Black Muslim community and how it might not be like, for example, you might be looking for writers and you might be wanting for people who have, what do you call it, MFA, for example. And I know a lot of amazing Black Muslim writers who have this, right? But some of them don't. Many of them don't. But they're naturally talented and they can write. But if that's your criteria, then you've already excluded a bunch of people who had to go do, I hate to say this, practical degrees, right? Because not like MFA is a practical degree, but you know what I mean. They had to go do like the degree that's gonna pay the bills
Mm-hmm.
and not do the MFA because that's like it's like it's not even. I think that's what I'm saying. So
I understand
when we
exactly what
have
you're
these
saying.
like false like criteria for measuring things, it actually puts up barriers, and we don't realize because we think, oh, we want excellence, right? So the point here is really looking to see, okay, what what does the community look like? How do I access the community? Because the reality is, when you understand the community better and the challenge is there, you're going to understand how to fix it. Because just like you might see a challenge with, I don't know, books about, I don't know, birds. You might say, oh, you know what? I've noticed that the books about, because that's something you care about, right? You're seeing
Mhm,
it. Or you
mhm,
might say, oh, there's no book about this particular figure. If you understand the issue, you care about it, you yourself going to recognize we need to change things. So I think I would say is actually educating yourself about the Black Muslim history and experience in this country. But I think if you do that, you're gonna be like, whoa, you're gonna like realize there's all these amazing stories. Like recently, a movie, a documentary came. I don't know if it's a documentary or movie, but a film was made about called Clara's Fruit, about Mother Clara Muhammad, the founder of the Clara Muhammad school system,
mhm,
and really the first, a pioneer the pioneer in Islamic education in America. and he pioneered Islamic black education. So both. She was a pioneer Islamic education generally. And also she ran the organization that her husband was in charge of for a number of years. I mean, she's a phenomenal woman. But the point here is that this documentary, this movie film was made about her life and about her life and her legacy. And I think watching things like that, reading books, just broadening your understanding of the Muslim community will help you see the gaps. And when you
Mhm.
see that, you're going to realize, oh, I need to have more of this. Because I think when people do things because they're self motivated, it's more powerful than me just saying, oh, you need to go get this book and this book and this book. But when you see the value of it, then you're like, oh, of course I need to. Like, I remember I went to an Islamic school to do a training. They want to do something on Black History Month. I spent half the training talking about who Carter G. Woodson was and what he built and how he built it, because I felt like his model and his lesson is like a model for us as Muslims in America.
Mhm.
And for many of them, many of them hadn't even heard his name before. Talk less of the organization that he built, the people that he mentored, people whose education he financed, just the what he did for the history of this country. Not just Black America, really this country, because there's
Yeah.
so many people that he mentored who benefited this country in so many different ways. So my thing is that if you understand that, you're then gonna know what to do. As opposed to me saying, oh, go get this book, do this lesson, excuse me, say this particular thing. I wanted for them to take ownership. So my thing is, like, I really feel that librarians and educators really understand these things so you can take ownership, so you can know how best to create an environment that serves all of the children that you are responsible for, inshallah.
Wow. I think that's wonderful, wonderful advice. Uh, Not only for librarians and educators, but also parents, just anyone. If you're part of a community, this is essential to make the community a better place for everyone. So, as we've said several times, you have many hats, you do many things, and all of it is amazing and beneficial for everyone. Where can people find you and some of the work that you do?
Alhamdulillah. So I actually do have a website. It took me a long time to make a website with my actual name. I was like, it sounds so strange, but I do have a website with my name. So there's that. It's RUKAYATY my first and last name.com. And I also have a website that has a lot of my work I do with children, my educational work. And this is Light Legacy Books. This is the publishing company. I when I started there, I wanted to be able to publish other people's books, but I don't have the capacity to do that. But I know when people hear about it, it inspires them because they're like, wow, I actually can try and do this myself too. So alhamdulillah, I haven't been able to publish a lot of books, but I've been able to alhamdulillah mentor people, answer their questions, support their publishing journeys, which I think is important, even if you can't, physically do it for another person. But so it'd be like legacybooks.com, um, rukayat.yakub.com. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, although I don't use Instagram often. I need to, need to get some young. I need to get one of my own young people, to come and run my Instagram
Yes.
social media for me. But it's just my first and last name on Instagram. So alhamdulillah, I'm on those places.
Perfect. Thank you so much. We'll definitely add those links to this when this is recorded to help everyone to be able to follow you and your work. Mashallah, may Allah reward you for all that you do. And that's all I have for you. Is there anything else that you would like to say?
I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. MashaAllah. May Allah Ta'ala reward you, give you immense success. And I really pray we get to see libraries that have like such a variety of books. And we have a generation that grows up and is actually be able to see,
Yes.
more than what's in their neighborhood, more than what they're used to, and be able to just get to know and know, respect, and really appreciate the people around them, and be able to appreciate humanity. So that's something that I pray to see, and your work is so integral to this. So thank you so much, sis.
You're welcome. No problem at all. And we look forward to learning about more that you do, more that you're, all that you continue to do, because I don't think you're going to be stopping anytime soon.
I mean,
Yes. So let's definitely stay in touch. And I hope you have a good day, inshallah.
thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye. Join the Islamic Library Association, and together we can shape a more inclusive future for literature.